Hey guys, welcome back to Ranger Survival and Fieldcraft. I'm Andrew, and what I have for you today is survival hunting kit and skills. Stand by. Choctaw. Man, there are a lot of turtles out right now, poking their heads up out of water. You got to be careful with turtles, man. They are crafty animals. They'll attack without warning, albeit very slowly, but they will attack without warning. Now, we've heard the news recently that we're expecting food shortages, and that's because of the events happening over in Eastern Europe. I'm going to leave current affairs and politics out of it, but we need to be ready for any situation. So this got me thinking about having a survival hunting kit. And I did a video on this a while ago about survival hunting kit, and I developed that right after I got out of some survival training. And so I've updated over the years, added to it, taken some things out of it, and modified a few things to better suit my needs, or at least in this area. So always adapt your kit to your environment as best as possible. But a survival hunting kit needs to have things for the water and then for the land as part of its components. So we should have things like snares, spears, ability to construct projectile weapons, and then we should have obviously fishing line, maybe some nets or other spears, gaffs, frog gigs, whatever we need for the water's edge or inside the water to attempt to get some game. But I think most importantly is that the survival hunting kit should contain items for which we know how to recreate off the landscape. So if we're left with just the rudimentary kit like a knife and some cordage, we should be able to go through the landscape, find the materials necessary to build appropriate tools like frog gigs, to build fishing hooks, to build maybe a net or other items to attempt to go after some game out here. Our kit should be small enough, transportable enough, and durable enough to move with us over terrain, contain all the items for water and land that we may need in our area, plus those items we know how to use efficiently and easily. And if we're left with just our knife and some cordage or just our knife, we're able to recreate a lot of those items from the landscape. All right, so I'm going to finish my coffee really quick, and then I'll take you guys over to the kit, and we'll lay it all out. We'll go over those items. Alright, so there are quite a few items laid out here, and then even more in this bush pot, or this small utility pot, which makes up the crux or the centerpiece of my survival hunting kit. And I'll open that for you in just a second. But all of these items are laid out just to illustrate that we have things that are already in our survival kit, like a survival knife, a saw, maybe we carry a large cutting tool like a machete. Then we have our bush pot, our bottle, 550 cord or other cordages, even our headlamp and some tape that should be part of our survival kit already, but we can pull from those items to help supplement our survival hunting kit if we need to. So that's just the intent, is understanding that we can use different parts of our kit to supplement for those items and then attempt to go after game out on the landscape or in the water. Now all the rest of this stuff is part of survival hunting kit. Again, cordages and then zip ties can be part of our normal survival kit. We can sneak these in just about anywhere. But all this stuff, minus what's in this utility pouch here, can fit in my saw pouch. This is just a ammo pouch for M249 squad automatic weapon. Back in the day when I was a lowly saw gunner, kept this for years, and I use it for my survival hunting kit. But all these items can fit in here, minus this utility pouch. One other thing that I think is beneficial to have as a survival hunting kit is just a simple survival net. Having one of these in our kit, very lightweight, transportable, easy to put in a small utility pouch like this and carry with us in an emergency. Now with our survival gill net, this thing can save us a lot of time. We don't absolutely have to have it. This is a fire and forget weapon. We can still collect it up, but the fish are going to tear holes in the actual gauge, or it's going to deteriorate over time. As long as we know rope craft and then some wood craft, it'll be easy to recreate that gill net. We're just going to need the appropriate amount of cordage and then building the materials from the landscape, which will take us more time. But as long as we know how to carve a gill net needle and then the gauge, and we can wrap it with small cordage, bank line, or the guts of 550 cord will work too, we can make an appropriate net the size we need to and the length, and then put that out in the water using connection points or anchor points, buoys, and then rocks to anchor this down, to use it the same way we would a survival gill net. So we just have. Then I'll do you a favor and I'll leave a link in the description section and then up at the top of the video here where you can click on another video I made on how to recreate this and actually make your net. So we've got our cordages and then our zip ties we can just shove in our ammo pouch. Let's talk about these three things really quick. Now, I'm a huge fan of bringing just the bare minimum material into the wilderness and then recreating everything I need from the landscape. It's a good habit to get into. It increases our knowledge, makes us a little bit more efficient, and then we constantly get that practice, which is why I'm a fan of bringing spear tips, any type of spear tip. This just happens to be the metal point tip like this. But we can bring this and other spear tips into the area and then fashion the shaft from the materials around the area with our survival knife or with our machete, and then just affix this to that shaft with our cordage, and then we have a spear ready to go. Much like carrying just a bucksaw blade into the wilderness and then recreating the frame from the landscape and then using some of our cordage to make that frame and make that tool work, we can do the same thing with metal implements just like the spear. One other spear tip I think would be great for part of a survival hunting kit is going to be that frog gig. We can use this, attach it to another shaft or spear, and then use this to pin a frog down at the water's edge or skewer that frog using our flashlight at dusk or dawn to blind that animal, and then pin it down, secure it with our hands, and bring it up out of the water. And it's easy food. I've been very successful with frog gigs over the years. Incredibly easy animals to go after, plus they are plentiful. With this frog gig, what I like about it is that we can bring this with us, and if we drop this or lose it for some reason, it's incredibly easy to recreate off the landscape. All right, so we got our frog gig metal tip attached, whipped 550 cord. We may lose the actual frog gig tip with this method, just whipping it, instead of using the screw to go through the spear shaft. So what we did was add just a small lanyard on here. It's very tight, end of the line bowline around the tines with a clove hitch and a safety half hitch on the back end here behind our whipping. That way if this thing falls off, it gives us another opportunity to find it in the water, or at least have it attached some way to our actual spear shaft. And this is the frog gig. So here's our improvised frog gig. We just took our spear shaft and split it again, giving us 4 tines. And then took paracord and wrapped these up with our sticks in here, acting as spacers to spread out those tines so we can actually gig something and hold it down to the ground inside the water like a frog, and then reach down and get it. But we've used paracord to lash everything together. We have a small whip down here with paracord that is acting as a stopper to prevent these tines from splitting on us more. Then we took the remainder of the 550 cord and wrapped it around the sticks that are separating our tines, giving us that good open hand with those 4 tines, and then lashed it down here at the bottom to give it a little bit more flex and open up those tines just a little bit more. Now what we can do is simply break off the excess in here without splitting the sticks in the middle, acting as our spacers, and then sharpen these up a little bit more. Now that we're talking about spear tips, one thing I like to look for out in the wilderness, especially around urban areas or places that are dilapidated and down, that have been abandoned, are just giant nails like this. We can use this as a spear as well, or at least a spear tip. We can hang on to this. This is where that file comes into play on our multi-tool. Use the metal end, and then we can fashion the tip into a fine point that is very, very sharp. And then take this nail and use it as a spear point as well, or as a defensive weapon. We can attach this to a shaft similarly as we would the spear point. But we can find these, keep these as part of our kit. We have it in our kit, and there's an improvised spear point that we can put together if we need to. All right, let's take a look inside our pot. This thing is full of good hunting equipment. So we got our lid. First thing we have is just a couple of large game snares, band of a slingshot. With our slingshot, and then with some zip ties or cordage, we can attach the slingshot band to a Y stick and make a slingshot. Find some ammo around the area, small rocks as round as we can get them, and then use those to attempt to hit some game that might be up in a tree, small birds, squirrels, whatever that we can find in the area. But now we have a way to fire projectiles at game animals. Here we've just got some smaller snares similar to our big ones right here. These are for smaller game that we can set out on a trail. So here's one thing I like, and that's improvisation. Taking this nail, bent over the top a little bit, and we can attach this to the end of our spear to make an improvised gaff. Take our multi-tool out again and sharpen the tip, and we just attach this and lash it to the base of our spear. And now we have a gaff pole that we can put down in the water and attempt to get fish or small game that way by gaffing that animal. Here we have just several different types of snare wire or small gauge wire, steel galvanized wire, and then trip wire from an emergency flare or ground security flare, and then picture hanging wire, and then larger gauge wire that we can use for larger snares. We can also use this large gauge wire for our snare set combined with one of our commercially made snares. We can use it to actually stand up this snare along a game trail and set it at the appropriate height that we want to snare that animal. Made some toggles with just cardboard and tape for our fishing line. We have a dual filament here, or a threaded 30-pound test line. We've got 10-pound green test and then clear 10-pound test fishing line for different water, for different animals in the water that we're going after. So several different types of fishing line to go in our kit. Different bobbers and floats. We can use the cork itself as kind of a concealed or subdued bobber. Instead of one of these bright white-orange bobbers, we can take this and attach it to our line. That way we have something a little less conspicuous we can throw out there in the water if we're worried about being caught or somebody stumbling upon our fishing line. And then we have just two different gauges of bank line number 36 over here, and then a smaller gauge here. We can use both for lashing or for snares. We can use the larger 36 bank line for an improvised trout line. We can make a concealed trout line and then attach one end to a stake in the ground at the water's edge, and then attach the other end to our water bottle, put rocks inside our water bottle, and then throw it out into the water to allow it to sink. And that way we have a concealed trout line as a passive trap for fish, just waiting for those fish to come by and take those hooks, and then we have food. Best way to launch your improvised trout line is to walk backwards from where your stake is and where your line is connected to the ground. That way the line gets stretched out and you distance yourself from any hooks that might be on the line, because if you throw this right now, chances are we'll get caught with a hook. It'll get in our clothing, and then we're going with it right into the drink. So walk backwards from this like you're setting your claymore, and then launch it out to the side. That way this weight will take the whole line. It'll swing out over and into the water, into the target area where we're going to set that trout line to attempt to get some fish. Then when you're done, just reel it back in. Good to go. A couple of small surgical razor blades for processing game. Just a tape sachet with split shot or sinkers we can use for our fishing kit. Another nail. And then just different size hooks for the appropriate fish we're going after. Smaller, larger, and a couple treble hooks on there. Some safety pins for improvisation. And then we can throw in small hooks and lures as part of our kit to attract that fish and get it to bite on there. It's everything that's inside the bush pot or the utility pot that makes up the heart of our survival hunting kit. And you don't think I'd walk this giant kukri out here and not use it, right? Speaking of projectiles, just like our slingshot that we made, modified with our zip ties and a Y-fork, we can make something very easy for us to use as another projectile to attempt to get some ground game. We can also use this as a club, and that is just a simple throwing stick. I prefer the Choctaw style, which has a large head up top, about a hand width in length. I'm going to leave just a little bit more on this one, and then everything below we shave off to a nice handhold. That way we have a lot of mass up top, little mass at the bottom to give us that good spin when we throw this stick. But then we have a lot of mass up top that we can use as a club as well, or we can use as a baton with our survival knife. And just like that, in a few minutes, we have a Choctaw throwing stick. Choctaw. Now real quick, let's talk improvisation. If we just have rudimentary items like our knife and some cordage, we can recreate a lot from the landscape anyway. See, we made that frog gig. You saw we made a Choctaw throwing stick. We just have mass up here at the head and then a tapered end we can use to throw and get some game. We can also use this as a club as well as a baton for the back of our knife for processing other material. Projectile weapon, similar concept to those spear points. We can bring the band with us, easy to pack. Zip ties to attach to a Y fork. And then we have a ready-made slingshot. Now we just need ammo and we can use it to attempt to get some game that way. Now there's some other methods that we can use if we have other resources available. If we're along the water right here, we find leftover fishing line or other hooks or lures, we can gather those up and make just a simple hobo reel. It's just a 6 to 7 inch piece of material tapered off the end, added bank line on one side with a lanyard to fit around our wrist, so when we're casting we don't lose this if we drop it. And then we just have our lure and our bobber and line on the other end, and we just cast this into the water and attempt to get some fish. Now one thing we should try out while we're down here at Big Pond looking for some bait for fishing is a simple rain stick. It's about a stick about a foot long or so, carved V-notches, and then we've got a smaller stick, and we just go up and down this stick while it's planted in the ground to create vibrations or simulate rainfall in an attempt to get some worms to show their heads, and we can pull them out of the dirt and then use them for bait. Now we've had a lot of rain lately, but I'm not really having any luck with the worm stick here, the rain stick, trying to get worms up out of the ground. I'm actually kind of impatient when it comes to something like this, so I'll just do what I always do and dig under some rocks. That's a no-go as well. No bait. You are a no-go at this station. Another thing we can make from sections of material out here, if we can harvest them, is there's a lot of Osage orange in the area, and they have good offshoots like this branch here, cut off the top, cut off the bottom, and left a good size weight right here to fashion into a war club. We can take this and use it specifically to dispatch animals or as a defensive tool. We can sharpen the end right here and use it as a digging stick to dig into the ground. But then Osage orange is a very hard wood. Once it dries out, mixed with a piece of cottonwood or other softwood in the area, makes a great fire plow board. You can see it's already fire hardened on the end from a lot of attempts. Now some other things we can do. L7 triggers, great. We just have a sapling out here we can use as an engine, similar to one of my previous videos. We just use cordage that we have available, or we use wire that we might find in the wilderness or along the water's edge. We can use that to establish a snare, set up our trigger with the stake in the ground, establish our trigger, set the snare along the game trail, and then just wait for the animal to go through the snare. The snare activates, lifts the animal up off the ground, kills it, or keeps it in place long enough for us to come back and actually harvest that animal, and then we have food. Improvisation. Another version of an L7 trigger that we can use for a simple deadfall if we don't have good saplings in the area or a way to make a simple engine is just by using deadfall. And a good one for that is the promontory deadfall. Now to make the cut for a promontory deadfall, all we got to do is grab our multi-tool. Big fan of the Leatherman Super Tool 300 because it's got a lot of stuff on it. But find our stick. I'm just going to demonstrate on this one. We make our cut wherever we want it to be. We're going to go about halfway into the material. Something about like that. I'm going to take this stick, flip it over, and do the same thing about 2 fingers, maybe 3 fingers down away from that cut and on the opposite side, the exact opposite side. So we've got our 2 stop cuts here. Got one on this side, flip it over, we've got one on the other side. And now all we're going to do is just give it a little pressure. You heard that pop? Flip it over, Do the same thing, as opposed to a small one. Break it off, and now we have 2 square sections. Then we just take out our survival knife and fashion one of these into a spear point, trying to keep that length without losing too much of that length. Now it's okay to shave off some of the bark if we're only using this for a little while. If it's going to be one of our primary traps that we're going to have to put out again and again, we might want to keep the bark all the way up the back of this just to keep that strength. But we want something like this, so when it sits in our trap, it's just barely touching there. Just a little bit of pressure, not much, holding the stick up. And then the cordage will be attached down here on the square portion as it's planted into the ground. And the top portion here with the spear point, that's going to go against the deadfall material, rock or log, whatever it is. That way, when the animal triggers that trigger line, it'll pull in like this. And that spear point will push away from the deadfall, making sure that deadfall actually collapses all the way on top of that animal, killing it. So, animal comes in underneath the trap to get the bait that is on the bank line. It can be whatever we want, peanut butter, whatever sticks to the bank line. The animal come in, hit that trigger, the promontory will fall, and the rock, our weight, our deadfall, will crush that animal. Alright guys, well, I hope you liked that video. A very down and dirty video on modifications and upgrades to my survival hunting kit, and then the things we can do with that kit based on the items inside, and then things we can recreate from the landscape. So, I hope you guys like this video. If you did like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment in the comment section. I always appreciate your feedback. I want to thank you guys for everything you do for me, for this channel, for your likes, your views, your subscriptions, your comments, your feedback, and your shares. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can, guys. The sun is still out, the water is still water, and I'm going fishing.